Hello everyone, my name is Rachel Elliot-Jones and I'm the creative producer of Assemble Papers and the head of community engagement at Assemble. I respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and to the future, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. It's incredible to see such a huge crowd here for tonight's panel discussion. Thank you and welcome. Tonight we'll be talking about the architecture of wellbeing. This is a theme of our latest print edition, a special issue to coincide with this year's MPavilion commission by the Naomi Milgram Foundation. We're very proud to be continuing our partnership with MPavilion, and we're very excited to be part of the conversation in the lead up to Amanda Levitt's magical design being revealed. I'd like to thank our print sponsors, Scanlon Theodore, for their ongoing collaboration and support. And I'd also like to thank Wheeler Centre for hosting us this evening. I'll now hand over to Assemble Papers editor, Eugenia Lim, to introduce tonight's topic and, of course, our esteemed speakers.
Thanks, Rach. So first up, allow me to paint a picture. We're in the birthing suite. It's beige and it's brightly lit, and it has some framed floral artwork, the kind you might find at your local IKEA or Bunnings. So to mask the hum of the heart monitors, try and transport myself to Iceland. So I have Björk on repeat. These are the clean clinical conditions in which I welcomed my baby daughter after 8 hours of power. And it was about as far away as a darkened cave as you could get, which is where I wanted to be. Wasn't my birth architecture of choice. The spaces we inhabit, whether built, social or symbolic, have a fundamental role to play in our well-being. You might call this the architecture of well-being. We explore this theme in our latest print issue. I hope you've all got a copy. And it's a topic that we'll tease out with tonight's discussion. Before I introduce our wonderful speakers, who will all present a particular perspective on this idea of well-being, I'd like to first say heartfelt thanks to all of our contributors and our readers who are in this room and who are in the world. Thank you for your wonderful words and images and your loyalty. It means a lot. It makes my life as an editor much easier, much more happy. In issue 4, just as a little taster, we travel to Amsterdam and we reclaim some houseboats. We visit the largest urban farm-to-table operation in Japan. We discover the underlying ecology and the Aboriginal connection to Melbourne. We get a sneak preview of Amanda Levitt's forest-inspired design for MPav, and we go up on the roof at the Commons, Breathe Architecture's landmark vertical village in Brunswick, and we'll hear a bit more about that tonight from Jeremy. Our first presenter tonight is Dianne Vella-Brodrick. She's an associate professor and director of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at the Uni of Melbourne's Graduate School of Education. She's the research director at the Centre for Positive Psychology and editor-in-chief of the Psychology of Wellbeing Journal and secretary of the International Positive Psychology Association. As a psychologist and founder of the Australian Positive Psychology Network, Dianne's research focuses on the development and evaluation of school-based and workplace wellbeing programs. In particular, she has a special interest in the effects of the environment on optimal health. Welcome, Dianne.
Thank you.
Jeremy McLeod, to my left, is the founding director of Breathe Architecture, a team of dedicated architects with a solid reputation for delivering high-quality design and sustainable architecture on projects of all scales. They focus on sustainable urbanisation. In particular, they've been investigating how to deliver more affordable urban housing to Melburnians. Breathe are behind the award-winning eco-apartments The Commons in Brunswick and are now collaborating with other Melbourne architects to deliver the Nightingale model, an open-source housing model led by architects. Jeremy believes that architects, through collaboration, can drive real positive change in this city we all call home. Hi, Jeremy.
How you doing?
And Sarah Kay, across the room, is a designer and design curator. She's one half of Blake Burrow-King, who have produced a catalogue of unique products in their design practice since forming in 2006. From 2011 to the present day, Sarah's curated and exhibited The Other Hemisphere, new work by a dynamic group of Australian designers during Milan Design Week at Ventura Lambrate. She's also founder and creative director of the international project Supercyclers, focused on innovative approaches by designers to sustainability, in partnership with Sydney designer Leanne Rossler. Sarah is also the creative director of Gallery O and Annex O, a micro-gallery exhibiting the works of international designers in Melbourne and Sydney. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks,
So we'll start with you, Dianne. We'll launch into the presentations now.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I realise that with something like wellbeing, there are so many aspects that can influence it. So as a human being, we interact with different systems, and our environment is really important in this. And really, I just want to highlight that mental health and wellbeing is a real issue in our society. And there's a high incidence of mental illness and reports of feeling stressed. On average, about 40% of people have reported experiencing throughout their life some sort of mental illness or condition. With our young people, 1 in 4 have reported having a mental illness in the past year. So it's not something to take lightly. It's something, mental illness is experienced by many people, and it's particularly sad when we look at our young members of our community who are struggling with mental illness. And really, the other thing that just amplifies this is that they're reluctant to seek professional help, and so often they're left to deal with their mental illness issues independently, or to talk maybe with their peers and not really receive sometimes the full professional help that's necessary to get them through. So any opportunity to be able to make a difference really is important. And I think trying to structure the environment or helping to educate people about how they can interact more effectively with the environment so that it can be conducive to health is really important. And the other thing that I want to emphasise too is that it's not enough just to focus on trying to ameliorate mental illness, but it's equally as important in trying to build resilience and well-being. So we don't want to leave people with an empty shell by just taking the bad things away. We want to bring in and introduce the good things so that they feel that their life is worth living. So it's very important to be thinking about promoting positive emotions and factors such as happiness. They're not necessarily a luxurious sort of state of experience. I know sometimes people do think, you know, of the term happiness as being something that can sometimes be a luxury when so many people can be suffering. But happiness can lead to so many important functional qualities as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But really we're trying to encourage people to feel content, people to feel alive and zestful in the things that they do. And in particular, there's something called the broaden and build theory, which is a theory that's been tested by a researcher and her colleagues, Barbara Fredrickson. And what it really talks about is when we can induce positive emotions in people, it can lead to so many important factors. So if you think about someone who's feeling sad or depressed, they withdraw from society. They like to stay indoors and to not interact with other people or to be involved in activities. The opposite is true when people are feeling well, when people are feeling positive, that they actually want to go out more, they want to be more active, they want to interact with others. And by engaging with the community and society, it means that they're developing resources, not just social resources, but potentially intellectual resources as well. And so it means that they feel that they belong in the society a bit more. They feel that they have more mastery over their environment, because when they have issues, and inevitably we will all have issues in day-to-day life, they feel that they have the resources, because they've built them up when they're feeling well, to be able to cope and deal with those sorts of situations. So positive emotions can be really functional. What's also important is we are a system. So as I said before, we need to think about the individual. You need to think about what it is that the individual wants to achieve, and how the environment is going to enable or prohibit that relationship or that desire to be able to achieve something. And really, I think there are some universal needs that individuals have, and one of those, more and more I think in today's busy environment and society, is the need for restoration. And the way in which restoration can take place is very much on a personal level, but one aspect in particular that I want to highlight is the interaction with nature and green space. As I said before, positive emotions is also really important, and I think the environment can offer ways in which it can be more positive. The other thing is staying active and involved, and thinking about how the environment can help people to move more, to physically move more. So many jobs are stationary these days. You don't really have to move very much. And I think physical activity can create endorphins and make you feel more alive. By moving, you're more involved with the community as well. And relationships are really important too for well-being, so we need to think about how the environment might help with that. So I want to talk a little bit about biophilia, and this is the innate connection humans have with nature, such as plants and flowers and other living things. It's like when we first evolved, that's really the world that we had. And more now we have more man-made structures that are often concrete, don't really have any natural qualities about them in terms of greenery, and I think this can sometimes make it difficult to replenish yourself. And so what happens is when you're walking around, for example, a city, is cognitively your thinking capacity is being really drained. And when you see nature and greenery, it gives you reprieve. It works in a different, it triggers a different part of the brain that doesn't require the same strain and cognitive capacity, and so often it gives you relief. So I think the aim is to add aspects of nature in living spaces so that they replicate natural environment and help to alleviate this discord, this constant tension in the brain. And that's what this attention restoration theory is really about. It's saying that often with involuntary attention, when you're interacting with inherently and appealing sort of stimuli, which is the case with nature, that just really makes it difficult, because your attention is really very cluttered. And so, as I said, when it's looking at nature, it's a lot more natural and relieving the brain. So connecting with natural environments, I think, can be really relaxing for some people. But one of the things that I also want to emphasise is sometimes you can have the environment that's potentially conducive to helping you to relax or helping you to feel more positive emotions, but there are personal qualities within the individual that also need to be triggered and maybe need to be trained. So you might have the most beautiful park, the most architecturally stunning building, but if the individual isn't mindful of those qualities, isn't appreciative of those qualities, then it detracts from the possible benefits that might accrue. So really it's things like mindfulness and appreciation of beauty that I think helps to create the wellbeing aspects that potentially we're talking about. And so in essence, I think it all comes down to coming back to basics in modern times. The complexity of life at the moment really doesn't need to be amplified. For most people, simplification is really important, and determining functionality. So, you know, if you think about different personality types, so you might be an extrovert, so you need to create an environment where you are going to interact with people a lot more. If you're an introvert, you need to create spaces where you can reflect, and introverts really sometimes need a lot of time and quiet space to be able to regenerate. Sometimes when they interact with the world, it can be draining on their energy systems, and so they need space and an environment where they can replenish. And whether that's out in a park or whether it's in a room in their home, that's really important. And something that's going to be sustained, something that's going to be part of a person's everyday lifestyle, because in order for well-being to be improved, it needs to be done on a regular basis, because with well-being, it's not just a superficial layer thing, but you want it to actually penetrate the biological and physiological system, which means even changing sort of neural connections within the brain, so that you develop habits and lifestyles that have the blueprint of well-being all over it, rather than just a one-off type of thing. And authenticity. I think it's really important when you're designing anything to really understand the consumer and what their particular needs are. And that's why I think my key message is that in order to design something, you really need to understand the individual, what they're hoping to be able to do, and then to create the environment around that different structure. So I'll leave it at that point, and I'm sure we'll have further discussion about more specific details, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Dianne. We're now going to hear from Jeremy.
Testing. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm one of 9 from Breathe Architecture, and I'm showing you this slide because Breathe Architecture isn't about me. I'm 43. I'm the oldest guy at Breathe. We've got a young crew because they're young, inspired, resilient. They care about what they're doing, and they haven't had a lifetime of developers beating them into submission. So this is Breathe. For years we've been working for property developers. Our practice is in Brunswick, and it's been incredibly depressing to be... we've been fired from quite a few jobs. We've resigned quite a few jobs. We've found it very, very difficult. In fact, developers find us difficult, so developers don't like to work with us. The word on the street is that Breathe are impossible to work with. It's because we've read the code of ethics that we signed when we became architects, which says that we don't just serve our client that pays us, but we serve the broader community. We serve the people that are going to live in our buildings. Anyway, long story short, in 2007, I spoke with 6 others, and we bought a site in Brunswick with the intent of building a triple bottom line apartment building, something that was sustainable, something that was livable, that had a sense of community, and importantly, something that was affordable in the current market. We bought a site next to a railway station. At the time, the real estate agent laughed when we signed the contract of sale, saying, "You're never going to sell this, buddy." And we went about, in our very naive way, we went about trying to achieve this. And so we built this project called The Commons, right next to the train. As a result of this, anecdotally, Big Track is now selling a bunch of railway side sites, and they're getting better property prices than they ever have before. So, you know, we can sell it. The same agent that told me that we'd never sell it has approached us recently to try and sell some of our new apartments, but We don't need those guys. If there's any real estate agents in the audience, you can leave now or just sit tight for the rest of the evening. So we built the commons. So the aim was that it would be a zero carbon development in the middle of Brunswick, between the Anstey train station and the number 19 tram, right next to the upfield bike path, 150 metres from the Brunswick market. It's easy to walk anywhere you want to. And the idea was that this would be a place where people could call this their first home, that it would be their new community, the same way that it would be in anywhere else in Europe where, yeah, that's right. So this is not innovative, it's innovative here. You know, we are not geniuses, we just travelled a little bit and took some precedents from Barcelona, from Spain, from Paris, and we built it in Brunswick. Everyone told us it was impossible, and as it turns out, it's pretty good. But we're not geniuses, we just did our research. And what we learnt out of the Commons was that the reason it's good is because it was led by 6 architects. The reason we nearly lost control of this project post-GFC is because we didn't really understand the funding and the finance behind it. And so since then we're working on Nightingale, and the Nightingale model is working with Dr. Andrea Sharam. We've built a funding and a financial model that enables 25 ethical investors to engage with 1 architect, and then, God forbid, talk to the purchasers that are going to buy into this apartment, ask them what they want, design how they want to live. So as a result, we get to find out that what people actually want is space and light. They want simplicity. They don't need bells and whistles, granite bench tops, walk-in robes. You know, at the Commons, you know, they have no cars, no air conditioning, no individual laundries, but instead they've got a rooftop garden, a shared laundry which doubles as a bar servery, and an incredible sense of community. So these are some of the commoners on the roof, and what we've learnt from the Commons is that there's lots of great things about it, but there's also things that don't work or that could be better. And so, as all good architects do, we've used it as a research piece. So we've built on that with Nightingale. So the survey data, the questions that we ask some of our Nightingale residents is, you know, are you an introvert, are you an extrovert, or are you an ambivert? And interestingly enough, we get like a 1/3 split down the middle. But then we give that data back to our landscape architect and we say, look, not all of these people need, you know, a massive rooftop dining hall. Some of them want a little space that they can retire to, a little place where they can, you know, rejuvenate themselves. So we've learnt a lot from the Commons. The other thing is that as a small practice, you know, we're not experts in multi-residential housing. You know, we've completed 2 multi-residential projects. The Commons is one of them. But we knew that we were never going to make a big impact in sheer volume of housing, but instead we used this as a case study. So whenever another architect writes to us and say, hey, how did you deal with your acoustic issue? We send them details next to the, you know, of how we dealt with it. How did you deal with, you know, this particular issue? We send them details. So we share our knowledge with other architects that want to achieve something similar. And I guess the other thing with Nightingale is that we've open sourced the IP. So we've sent all of the financial modelling, all of our case studies from the Commons to architects all around Australia, in Fremantle, in Perth, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, in Newcastle, in Brisbane, in Sydney. Next week I'm meeting with a group of architects in Sydney to, you know, I guess help them do a Nightingale project of their own. And so this is the Commons community. So you can see that the people that bought into the Commons, what was interesting is when you make a building with no cars, no air conditioning, no laundries, no en-suites, no walk-in robes, no bells, no whistles, what you find is that the people that buy into the building have a similar value set. So these people that you're seeing before you come from all different ages, all different demographics, but they have similar value sets. And as a result, I bought into the building as well. You know, I'm living the dream, so to speak. And we made friends with these people. So there's progressive dinners, which, and look, it's not a cult, but it's kind of a cult. So So we have progressive dinners going from each other's, living rooms. We have barbecues at the end of each month when the weather's fine. Emily's 40th birthday is soon, and she's invited everyone in the Commons via the blackboard downstairs, and we're doing that on the rooftop. Recently, 7 of us got in a maxi taxi, went to the Sydney airport, flew to Sydney, caught the train to the Blue Mountains, and spent 4 days in the Blue Mountains together. So that's me and my neighbours. I would class my neighbours as some of my closest friends. When we started work on Nightingale, I said to Tamara, shall we move to Nightingale now and we'll, see how that works? And Tam said, no, I'm never leaving the Commons. And I'm like, why is that? Is it because the architecture is so beautiful? And she said, no, it's because of my neighbours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Now over to you, Sarah Kay.
Hello. So essentially I'm a designer, but I'm also a curator. I think that's partly because I just want to make projects where I can be involved, essentially. I studied at RMIT as an architect and made films all the way through, so I was always a reactionary. And then once I got involved in the film industry, I started designing again. And in 2006, my partner and I, my husband, who's also my partner in design practice, Blake Brenking, moved to Hobart, and I opened a little tiny shop, a micro store, design store, on Macquarie Street. And I used to see probably 6 to 8 logging trucks go by every day with logs on them that were probably like a quarter of the tree, a piece of the tree, one at a time. So it was like, there were logging trucks that had lots of logs on them, but these were old growth forest logs. And they were telling us that they weren't doing that. And I would literally, it's embarrassing, but cry sometimes because it was heartbreaking to see that. So that was between 2006 and 2009. When I came back to Sydney, I met up with Leanne Rossler, who we'd found that we had this common interest in most things, design. I'd actually met her in Hobart. She came into the store. But the gist of our first conversation was that where is the design, where is the sustainability in design that's looking at things other than an aesthetic that isn't necessarily a recycled one? So something that draws on modernism or is more inspired or more interesting conceptually. So that prompted us to start this project, which was Supercyclers. And in that first year that we started, we set ourselves the task of taking the worst, most discarded, least biodegradable product there is, which is the plastic bag, and making something that we thought would be keepable, would make people want it again. So in the image, what you can see there is the plastic bag ghostware works that we made, and I was taking an exhibition of Australian design to Milan in 2011, so that project was a part of that exhibition. The thing that was most interesting about it was that it wasn't the beginning of sustainability in design, but it was really amazing, the kind of reception that we got. People didn't know what it was they were looking at. They thought it was wax or something else. But the driving force then became like, well, there are lots of people doing this kind of thing. It's not just us. Let's take a look and see, maybe if we just can encourage everybody to look at it slightly differently. Can I go past this and come back to it? Because that's the next. So essentially, no, I'll go back. Essentially, we want to push the boundaries of the ideas of sustainability and design. This is actually the most recent project that Supercyclers has been a part of, or something I've been working on with Andrew Simpson, who's an industrial designer in Sydney. It's called the Marine Debris Bakelite project, and it's a product we've developed which is kind of akin in feel and look to Bakelite, which I think is beautiful. But it's made from the debris that's collected from Australian beaches out of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So, yes, what's the next thing? This is the no heater winter chair. So it's an idea, it's not necessarily about recycling, it's about keeping warm without turning the heater on. It's got a chair cape that wraps around you and a matching set of mittens and booties and a little helmet. This is just a piece of shareware that I made when I was working on a publication, which was, we wanted to embody the idea of recycle to a friend. So they're all just ideas, and the idea of thinking outside of what were the preconceptions of sustainability or dealing with waste is. This was from the second exhibition that I took to Milan, SOS, Supercycle Our Souls, which, because we profiled international designers and Australian designers, that ended up being quite a far-reaching sort of exhibition. Tamara Mains's piece, which is the light at the top, was, I think, took the sustainable idea to one of its best, most logical conclusions, where there wasn't even an object. It was a template that you downloaded on the internet, and you could put it onto any material that you wanted that was either new or old, in this case cardboard, and create a light out of it. This is just another one of our ideas, which is that we could take a product like a plastic drinking straw, which there are phenomenal amounts of plastic drinking straws consumed and discarded every day, something like 500 million, I think, and much of that's ending up in the ocean. And it's just this thing that we don't even need. You can just drink without the straw. So our idea was that we'd take something that was the discarded thing and fuse it to something which was more valuable, and in that way raise the value of the discarded piece. So there's a lot of that as well. There's the idea that we could place value back onto waste and see it as the resource that it actually is, as opposed to something that needs to be gotten rid of. But that's another thing that we talk about, which is that a little mantra that we came up with, which is that there is no way. So much of the waste that we're dealing with is out of our field of vision, so we don't even have to think about it because we don't see it. But the truth is that it's still here, especially with plastic. It doesn't go away. So every bit that we've made in the last 50 years is still around on the planet somewhere. So if we can do other things with it, it's beneficial.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
So we'll open up for a panel discussion amongst us before we go to the floor. There's some interesting ways that all of these different approaches intersect with wellbeing, so it'd be great to kind of tease that out a little bit. I guess staying on that idea of simplicity and paring back, maybe start with you, Jeremy, about the idea of this kind of architecture of reduction, which I guess is maybe something you've always done in your work, I imagine. Commons is probably like a shining example of it now, but it seems like something that you've always been thinking about, the kind of common sense approach, using less to do more, that kind of thing. Like you said, it wasn't a genius stroke of, but it's something that you've sensed and experienced. What are some of the spaces and places where you yourself as an individual have kind of experienced, this kind of architecture that does that, this simplicity through design?
I think, we worked on a project for the City of Melbourne, creative spaces, making art studios for 72 artists in some old warehouse space in West Melbourne. And during the interview process, when we interviewed the potential tenants, the spaces that artists would occupy. So initially we thought that the budget that we were given was totally unachievable. So $300,000 for 3,000 square metres. So it's $100 a square metre. For any architects in the room, you all know would cover your fees. But when we went to interview artists and see their incredible spaces that they'd, occupied and, made do with what they had, and which were incredibly endearing spaces. And when you ask them what do they actually want, it was always affordable space and a little natural light, and that was it. But it was the way in which they'd taken their living room and pulled everything out of it, and so it was a surprise to go into what was a domestic space and suddenly it was a studio or a sculpture studio, or to go into someone's garage at the back, which was an uninspired steel garage, which is obviously incredibly hot in summer and incredibly cold in winter, but it was the way in which they'd decorated, or the way in which that they'd used the inside of the steel work as their mixing palette for all of their paint. And obviously it's the way that artists are very, very good at occupying different spaces, so industrial spaces or old office spaces, and not being precious about the way that they treat the services within there. So they become incredibly utilitarian, but at the same time they're mixed with moments of beauty. So I think that, our time researching creative spaces and meeting some of those artists, we got a good understanding of how to make really engaging, quite beautiful and incredibly imperfect spaces.
You mentioned too that the Nightingale kind of builds on some of the imperfections that you've sort of experienced through living at the Commons, and that you've kind of built in, you will build in spaces for different personality types and things like that. Can you talk about how that might play out in the actual building itself? Nightingale?
Yeah, sure. So, within the Commons, firstly talking about that idea of reduction, the idea of taking stuff out to save money is not uncommon in the development world. But what normally happens is that they take out all the stuff with meaning and leave in all the meaningless crap, because you can sell that, you can tick the box. With the Commons, to make something both more sustainable and more affordable, we took out the basement car park and saved $750,000. We took out all of the en-suites and we saved $300,000 out of the cost plan. With some of that money, we made the building more thermally efficient, and then we could take out the air conditioning, so we saved another $350,000. So we kept on taking things out, which reduced the overall price point of the Commons, but it also, I guess, helped us self-select the people that would purchase back in. One of the things that has worked really well on the Commons is the South communal garden. And you've been there, you've seen that it's broken up into 3 different spaces and over 2 different levels, so people can occupy different spaces. On the north side is the productive garden, so it's much more agricultural, it's very big, and we thought that people would use the north side in the sun so much more. But what we've actually found is that people are using the south side, the smaller spaces, the introverts kind of, retreat to sit down behind the kind of step down where they might sit together, or they might sit on their own and watch, reruns of Game of Thrones or whatever it is, or read their book, but have a sense of their own space. So it's really helped us work with Oculus, our landscape architects at Nightingale, to make sure that we have spaces that suit both the extroverts. And so through the interview process for Nightingale, the extroverts are incredibly good at telling you what they want. The introverts, they'll tell you that they don't want anything, and you have to really delve and ask the introverts what they would actually like. So I guess it's actually, the Nightingale is meant to cater, to introverts as well as extroverts.
Well, perhaps I could tease out that theme of simplicity with you, Sarah, because you've often said that supercyclers is about the beautiful simplicity of an idea. And in fact, in one of our articles, you've said the glaringly obvious simple manifestation of an idea that no one had thought of yet, but that makes us feel in sight of it as though it had been. And now I'm going to borrow a question from you and ask, how do you simplify in life or design without moving backwards? It's your own question.
Who did I ask that? Yeah. I don't know. That's a tough question.
Or maybe we could reframe it and perhaps you could tell us a bit more about how you employ reductionism in your own practice.
I think the idea, more to do with what you were, the quote that you quoted of mine, is that quite often when you're faced with something that you appreciate, it does feel as though, you know, it's been done before, and you know, it isn't necessarily the case. So, and I think that there's you know, in design there's always the danger of trying to overcomplicate things by finding the answer, and quite often it's the first thing that you think of, or you know, the function will actually dictate what the use is, or what the thing is. I mean, I was actually specifically talking about how we made those plastic objects, which was very straightforward. We just heat them gently over objects to get the shape, and of course then they look very similar to the shape, and they can be whatever you want them to be. And we actually published that method on the Supercyclers website so that other people could do it too. That was one of the main things we wanted to encourage, was that these are simple ideas that you can actually do yourself, but also if you had an idea that was simple like that you could perhaps, you know, try it out. I think we've kind of become disempowered in terms of how we handle so much of our lives, and definitely waste and the issues of the environment and sustainability have been, you know, it's like someone else is going to take care of that. We're not going to do it ourselves, and yet it's possible for us to do it ourselves. It's, you know, I think it starts with us.
And I guess that's something that you were touching on before. I mean, Supercyclers is something you started with Leanne, but it's more of an umbrella to encompass several different designers.
Yeah, lots. Anyone who wants to be a part of it can be. But I mean, we've got pretty tough aesthetic judgments. So you've got to either, be doing something pretty amazing conceptually or aesthetically. I think that's the key, because we want to be inspirational. We want to make sure that it kind of is worthwhile in that way as well.
Dianne, I had a question for you. Often in your research and your educational methods, smartphone and kind of app technology is employed as a tool to sort of try and gauge people's well-being and emotional feelings at the time. But often I find myself as well, like in this day and age, it's often those tools which are the things that we feel most bound by, social media 24/7 and that kind of thing. So how do we find the sort of balance between simplicity and this kind of ongoing need to be connected in this digital age?
Yes, it's an interesting question, because, you know, we do tend to get caught up in this notion of affluenza. That is, you know, you wanting to have more and more, to be connected, to have all the technology that's available to you. But this notion really around materialism can be a problem if it is taking over your life. And, you know, I think the key there is to underscore the importance of the experience. And so if the different mediums that we use, whether that's a telephone, whether it's, you know, online sort of mediums to communicate with people, sometimes that can be beneficial if you're not able to contact those people face to face. And so in many instances it can actually promote more social interaction, which is a really important element for well-being. But in some instances it can take away from sort of the natural experience and just lead to that consumer greed that is not conducive to well-being. So I think from the technology point of view, you also need to understand the constellation of things that people are involved with. So often there are, for example, recommendations that they'll say, you know, young people in particular, 13 to 17 years of age, shouldn't be using technology more than about 2 hours a day, 2 hours a day of their leisure time, because then that starts to impact on their mental health. But it depends on how they're using that technology, who they're interacting with, and what other things they do throughout the day. So if all they do is interact via technology, I think it's a problem. But if they're still maintaining healthy relationships, they're still out there getting fresh air and doing exercise, still, you know, going to work or to school, then that's okay. I think you need to have a look at the big picture rather than just identify, you know, one gadget as potentially being a problem. It's just too limiting to look at it that way, and too judgmental, I think, because I'm sure it's a source of well-being for some people, technology.
I guess, again, it depends on the person and their approach.
Yeah, and their lifestyle and what else they're doing. So it's really the holistic approach that's important. Each person will have a profile of the things that they do, will have a profile against their own individual difference factors, you know, their preferences. Some people are really low-key, low activation, and really enjoy just chilling out, sitting down. Like I know, for example, myself, I'm more introvert than extrovert, and I don't like actually talking on the phone, and in the evening I prefer to sort of chill out and have time by myself, particularly because during the day I'm often surrounded by a lot of people. Being an academic, I'm with students all the time, other academics all the time, and it can be a little bit depleting. I enjoy it at the time, but it really has a drain on me, and so technology for me is a nightmare, you know, in the evening, you know, because there's emails coming all the time, you know, the phone can potentially ring. That would probably take me over the edge if I was constantly doing that. So it really does, I think, depend on your own personality and preference, yeah.
Don't call Dianne at night.
You can call me during the day, that's okay. I've got a limit and then I expire.
Let's maybe talk about this idea of open source and community and sharing, because it's something, I guess, that all of you do in some way or another in your practice. So Jeremy, I'm interested in this, the sharing, the open source IP around the finances and the model for Nightingale, because I guess an important part of the project is not just the kind of community aspect and the sort of community of residents that will be there, but it's the collegiate nature of you know, bringing other architects on board with you, and that idea that this model will keep spiralling, hopefully. Do you think, is this a sort of generational thing? Like how have you achieved that? Because it's not easy in a business that's often about competition.
It is generational. So to the baby boomers in the audience, I apologise. When I sent out an email in dismay after so 11 people approached us and said that we have funding. Can you build us a co-housing project? We've got money. We want you to build us a co-housing project like they do in Germany, in Berlin, like a Baugruppen model. So we went and met with a bank. I won't mention the bank, and we talked about how the equity finance would work. And the bank said to us, you can't use the money that these people have as equity. That money is deposit money, which gets held in security in the lawyer's office as a second line of security against the debt that we're going to provide to you. You need to go and find yourself a nice developer, I think that's the way they termed it, and try and find that in Melbourne. You need to find yourself a nice developer, and they can run the project, and your group can buy the apartments off them. So that guy was a baby boomer, but that could have been anyone. He was answering to his credit manager much higher up. But that was the understanding within the financial institutions in here. I went back home and I wrote an email to 30 Melbourne architects, and I wrote about Robin Boyd and what Robin Boyd and Neil Clerihan had done in 1955 with the small home service, where they designed homes, limited edition plans, and they sold them for £5 each, which by today's terms, it's $833. I've done the calculations. So you could buy a Robin Boyd designed home, documents to build from for $833. That's incredible. And a limited edition. And the idea was that they would bring architecture to the masses because they saw the urban sprawl happening and they saw that it was a massive problem. This was in 1955. That's over half a century ago, and what's changed? Nothing. In 1975, Graham Gunn and David Yankin put together the Merchant Builders Association, again trying to bring modernist homes, or more modern homes and affordable homes to Melburnians. And since then, since the 1970s, there hasn't been an architect-led insertion into what's been happening in our city. And you've all seen what's happening in the CBD. It's absolutely depressing, and I love this city. So I write this email to 30 of my colleagues. Most of them are Gen Xers because Gen Ys haven't established their own firms yet. And I said, let's get together. Let's fund our own projects and let's build meaningful projects. And within 5 minutes, Andrew Maynard had written back to me, like it was it was a call to arms, but Andrew Maynard had written back to me within 5 minutes saying, I'll get whatever money I can and I'll put it in. James Legg and Simon O'Brien from 6 Degrees, they were writing back to me within 10 minutes. So this is night time and I'm getting responses from architects. And so within the first week, I had 7 architects committing $100,000 each, which they were getting, they were borrowing against their own homes to invest in a project by Breathe Architecture to try and break the cycle of what's been going on. It's incredible. So as a result, we've tried to then open source that further. So we've tried to invite other architects. So again, if you're an architect in the room and you haven't had a personal invitation from us, I'm really sorry, you're invited. So the IP is available from the Robin Boyd Foundation, which is a not-for-profit organisation, and we will help you wherever we can. So there's plenty of work going around, like there's lots and lots of Singaporean and Malaysian developers doing lots and lots of apartments here. And so we think there's enough work for every Melbourne architect to lead their own Nightingale project and do something meaningful. So we're not concerned about competition, we're concerned about the outcome.
Get on board, everyone.
Okay, I'm wary of the time and I want to give everyone in the audience a chance to ask questions. I'm just going to ask one question of Sarah and then we'll open it up. So I know that you've already spoken about a lot of your work being open source and sharing it as much as possible, making it known that other people out there can do it themselves. I wanted now to focus on what you mentioned before. So the Supercyclers Collective, I guess it's a very elevated and aesthetic approach to sustainability. And I was wondering if you think that beauty can be a form of activism.
Yeah, I guess it's just doing whatever you can, and that's definitely my field. I mean, as a designer and artist, it's the way you look at the world. So, yeah, I think beauty can definitely influence the world in a positive way like that. But I actually also wanted to bring up something else, if it's okay. I wanted to talk about a sort of an idea, which is that I think what's happening, or what we're trying to see in design, is a reflection of the same kind of movements that are going on in the food industry, the slow movements, where we're getting what we're seeing is a reconnection of people with the things that they use. So, in the same way as you want to know where your food came from, you want to know where the things that you use come from. And this also picks up a little bit on what you were saying about the story and the experience. I think what's ended up happening in the industrialised world is that we have absolutely no connection with the things that we buy other than that we use them. So there's no going to visit, for example, a knife maker who'll make you the tool that you need to cut the things that you're going to eat. And there's no, you know, that gives you some involvement. Actually, it's a little more akin to what you go through as a client with an architect. But so I would love to see that happen more. It is happening. It's definitely part of that whole artisan thing. But yes, that's a big deal for me.
Thanks, Sarah. And there's a lot more to discuss, and we're only really scratching the surface here. But I wanted to open it up to the audience now to see if you had any questions for our speakers in the last few moments of tonight's talk. Right.
Hi. Thank you all. I'd like to, when I think of the wellness of the architecture of wellbeing, I kind of think of all the many parts of me, which are the matter and the antimatter, the emotional, the ethereal. And so how am I going to better my living by the architecture that I choose to live in, by the materials that I choose to use, and all that? When I look at, and thank you, Jeremy, for, you know, that whole thing about what Europe's doing with rooftops that has taken so long for Australia to do. And it's interesting that Sydney's following Melbourne. That's weird. Yeah. Now, I'm an immigrant. I've come as a 5-year-old. And so I'm moving backwards. Yes, I've got the iPhone, the Apple, and all that, you know. But I'm moving backwards, and I'm moving backwards to knowing where my food's coming from and what chemicals are in there. So the idea of actually having rooftops and co-op, you know, spaces that people can grow the food. That food that's grown has got a higher bio, you know, energy for the human body. It's actually better for us. So for me, the architecture of wellbeing is about bringing it back, like coming full circle back to the basics of who we are, and actually looking at all the best of what we've been able to learn as a civilization, and eliminate everything that's kind of a disease for us, or an imbalance, and I can't. I've got a background in contract administration, project management, and I've become an artist. But like, you know, there's no integrity in the industry. There's no integrity anywhere, and so I can appreciate how difficult it's been for you, Jeremy, to do what you're doing, and all of you, because you're outside the square of what's supposed to be normal and acceptable. So overall, the question is, these other aspects of well-being, I mean, are they going to come into our health? I mean, the way we look at medicine, the way we look at, is any of that anywhere near us in the next year or so? Or is it like 50 years? You know, am I going to be dead before it comes? Yeah.
What do you think is
Great
well-being?
question.
Is it going mainstream? Mainstream yet?
It's well-being is so subjective. So, you know, for my wife, it's, you know, sitting down in the winter garden and getting some sun and sitting next to some plants. She gets incredible rejuvenation from all the plants in the commons. You know, for me, it's the connectedness, you know, of my neighbours. So I guess, you know, it's different for all of us. And it's, we were talking before about how difficult it is to quantify this, and how what we're really lacking, and some of your studies were from 1989, you know, so what we're really lacking is, I guess, empirical data about what is it to be well, you know. Is it to be rich and have everything that that you think that you can desire? I don't think so. You know, for me, it's, you know, it's to feel like I have purpose in our society. But at the Commons, you know, this idea about, you know, the slow movement, you know, we've tried to instigate, you know, materials as close to their natural state as possible. We've tried to encourage imperfection so that people move in and feel like they can hammer a picture onto the wall. They can paint it black or green or yellow. They can add tiles or put a shower curtain in if they want to, but it's meant to be the starting point for their life, not the finishing point. And what we're finding with most development stock is that they're white boxes that are perfectly curated on the day that they're handed over, for the settlement inspection, and then they degrade very, very fast shortly after. So the best day that your apartment exists is the day that you get it, and then it's ever in decline. Whereas I think that, like any space, whether it's your workspace, and so if you're working on a biophilic solution where you're surrounding yourselves with plants and you care for those plants, over time your workplace gets better. But it's the same as your home environment, you know, that it should get better over time. But it needs humans to care for it to do that. So yeah, you've got to make your space well. It's up to you.
And if I could just add to that, I think education is really important, and it's about education in terms of knowing what you can do, because autonomy is really important for wellbeing, feeling like you are able to make choices about the life that you have. So sometimes you might be in a job, for example. I know what had happened to me when I first started at Melbourne University. I was in an office that had no natural light. It was an office that was internal and had no windows. And I was going home with headaches all the time. I found it difficult to concentrate. And so I knew that I was aware of some of the research that said that if you go for a walk, and not just a walk through the city, but a walk through parks and where there's a lot more nature, flowers and fragrances, and that you really took the time to appreciate and express gratitude as you're walking through that space, then you come back a lot more rejuvenated. And they've shown this to be the case with research where they've actually got people to go down a walk through a city without any nature evident throughout, and then a walk in nature, the same length of time, and then they returned and they were asked to do some sort of task, a arithmetic sort of task, a cognitive that requires cognitive capacity, and those that had the walk out in nature were able to concentrate and complete the task far more effectively. So it really can have this replenishing capacity, and to know that, so that I was fortunate. After about a year I was able to move to an office that did have a window, and it made an amazing difference. But I knew what the effects were of me being in that office, and I really tried to be active or proactive in minimising those negative effects that occurred. But even things, I think, not just at an individual level, but rallying to make places like hospitals more conducive to recovery. And they've found that if you have a view outside of greenery, that your recovery time is much quicker, that you rely less on medication, and that you return. So post-operative, you're less likely to return because of returning symptoms. So it's all the difference between if you've got a window or not a window, and so natural light or not, and also whether you've got a view outside the window which is of some green nature thing or just bricks. So it's the nature, the light, that has healing properties. It's innate within us. We're drawn towards that irrespective of what our personality type is. So I think that's really important for us to be thinking about creating communal spaces, and especially things like hospitals, daycares, schools, where a lot of people are there, and are there often not because they choose to be there, that we really need to look after those and have a voice to make their quality of life better in those circumstances.
I'm not sure if we have time for one more question. Yep.
Hi, Jeremy. Are you able to talk a bit more about the Nightingale project, how you, especially the design process, how you said a lot of architects are part of it, but are they just funding it or are they all designing it, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, look, it's benevolent dictatorship in Nightingale. So there's one architect leading the project, and it's funded by 25 ethical investors. Nightingale version 1 is led by Breathe Architecture, so we're the design architects, and Andrew Maynard Architects, 6 Degrees Architects, Claire Cousins Architects, Architecture, and a few others. I should be able to remember them all. Isn't that terrible? Have invested along with some other ethical investors. So they've together, everyone has essentially we've all put our houses on the line to fund a project. So we raised $2.5 million in equity, which then helps us secure another $5 million in debt to build the project. As far as the design process is concerned, the real difference between a Nightingale project and any other multi-residential housing project is the interview process. So we had a series of, and also the community consultation. So the planning process for Nightingale started with community consultation, which would normally end in lots of objections, and instead it ended in 3 objections to our planning application for a 5-storey building with a rooftop garden, and 177 letters of support. And when we went to the Urban Planning Committee meeting to present Nightingale, there were so many people that came along to try and help us get a permit that had to move all the furniture out of the gallery. It was incredible, and they moved us to the front of the agenda items so they could get us all out of the gallery to hear the rest. So it was awesome. So the community rallied behind this because we went through a proper community consultation process where we said, this is what we're going to do, this is what we want to do, what do you want to see in Brunswick, what do you want to see? And then we came back to them with some design changes that met some of the questions or some of the issues that they had with the project. And then through the design process, we interviewed 53 people that wanted to live in Nightingale. We asked 4 of them that were investors to step out of the ballot process. So we got back to 49 people, and of those 49 people, we took their results, we aggregated their results, and then we amended the design to take that, to take their requirements on board or their comments on board, which is very uncommon, for a multi-residential project. It happens in Germany, but it doesn't happen here. But yeah, it's just the money, really. They're just paying for it.
Any last questions before we wrap up? Okay, I just want to say thank you to each of our speakers. Sarah, Dianne, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us tonight and sharing your insights. And thank you to you all for heading out. Make sure you grab a copy of issue 4. And we're strolling down to Shebeen, aren't we, after this? So please join us if you're free. Thanks.